Attackers thought she was just a helpless old lady until her silent guardian left them terrified. The snow in Cedar Valley didn't fall, it settled, layer upon layer, like time itself, gathering weight. From the window of her cabin, Eliza McCrae watched it come down, the flakes catching the dull afternoon light and drifting sideways in lazy spirals. 82 winters had come and gone in her lifetime, but none felt as thick with silence as this one. Her hand, veined and freckled, curled around the warm porcelain of her teacup, fingers trembling ever so slightly, though not from the cold. The fireplace crackled behind her, casting flickering amber shadows against the log walls, but Eliza didn't turn. Her gaze stayed pinned to the trees, pines rising like sentinels beyond the frost-covered glass, their limbs heavy with snow. There was something about the quiet today, not comforting, not mournful, waiting. Her cane rested against the wall beside her. She didn't need it inside, not usually, though some days the ache in her knees made her feel more like aged bark than bone. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate, and stepped to the front door. The air beyond it would be sharp, but her curiosity outweighed her reluctance. Cedar Valley had taught her long ago, when the stillness changes, you listen. Outside, the cold met her skin with the intimacy of an old friend, unforgiving but familiar. Eliza pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped onto the creaking porch. The snow beneath her boots was clean and unbroken, save for the trail of rabbit prints meandering along the fence. The valley stretched before her like a breath held in the lungs of the world. Nothing moved until something did. A sound she hadn't heard in months, a low crunch, tires on frozen gravel. Her brow furrowed. No one used the trail road in winter. It wasn't plowed, wasn't even marked on most maps. The only people who came through here either belonged or were lost. But the vehicle emerging from the woods was neither. It was a black SUV, sleek and heavy, its tires too clean for the trail it had taken, its windows tinted to hide intentions. Eliza's grip on her cane tightened as the vehicle came to a stop near the gate. The engine cut off. For a moment, there was only the ticking sound of cooling metal. Then a man stepped out. He was in his 40s, maybe younger, though it was hard to tell beneath the expensive coat and gloves that looked more suited to ski lodges than snow-draped wilderness. His boots crunched as he made his way toward the porch, stopping at the first step. "Miss McCrae," he said with a smile too white for the forest. "It's a pleasure." She didn't return the smile. "That depends on why you're here." He gave a practiced chuckle, lifting both hands as if to show he came in peace. "Mason Varelli," he said. "I represent Alpine Developments. We're working on a project to revitalize this region, ski lodges, eco-resorts, boutique cabins. Cedar Valley has incredible potential." Eliza didn't blink. "And you've come to buy it from me?" "Only if you're willing," he said smoothly, reaching into his coat to produce a folder. He didn't open it, just let it sit in his hand like a bribe waiting for the right words. "We'd ensure it's done with care, sustainability. Your name could even be attached, honoring your legacy." Eliza let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I've seen what honoring means to men with money. And legacies don't need hotels." Mason's jaw tensed briefly, then relaxed. "You could live anywhere, Miss McCrae, a beach, a warm city. You don't need to be alone out here." She stepped down one stair, her eyes locked on his. "I've lived many places, Mr. Varelli. But only one of them ever knew me. This valley fed me when I was a girl, held me when I buried my son, and whispered me every story I ever wrote." She paused, letting the words settle like the snow. The land isn't for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone. For a beat, they stood in silence. Then Mason nodded the way men nod when they're pretending they aren't annoyed. I understand, he said, though he didn't. He turned, walked back to his SUV, and drove off with tires that turned the snow into gray slush. Eliza watched until the trees swallowed the vehicle. Only when the engine sounds were gone did she let herself exhale. The wind stirred then, lifting the hem of her shawl and rustling the bare branches like breath against bone. That night, Eliza sat by the fire with a notebook balanced on her lap. The tea had gone cold. Her pen scratched softly as she wrote, not stories, but memory, raw and unfiltered. She wrote about her grandfather's hands, rough from splitting logs, and her mother's voice, soft as flannel. She wrote about the first fox she ever saw in winter, the way its red fur had seemed to burn against the white. And she wrote about the land, how it listened, how it remembered. Outside, the snow deepened. It blanketed her trail road, softening the tire tracks left behind. The forest stood still, but not silent. Somewhere in the dark, something ancient shifted beneath the drifts. Not a threat. Not yet. But a warning. The wind howled differently after Mason left. It twisted around the chimney with an edge, rattled the shutters like knocking fingers. Eliza didn't sleep that night. Instead, she stoked the fire higher and listened to the creaks in the beams, the sighs in the walls, the murmur of the pines leaning into one another. The valley was speaking, and she, more than anyone, knew how to listen. It wasn't just a refusal she had given that man. It was a vow. She had buried her husband beneath a cedar tree that grew near the creek, his headstone marked only with initials. She had scattered her son's ashes beside the pond where he'd caught his first trout. Her words were printed on paper, yes, but her soul was buried in this dirt. And now someone wanted to pave over it. By morning, the world had turned to glass. Ice glazed the windows in delicate veins, and the sky had paled to a color that promised more snow. Eliza made her way outside to fetch wood, her boots sinking with each step. She paused at the gate. Mason's tire tracks were gone, but the silence he left behind remained. She glanced at the pines. Somewhere, a crow cried out, once, sharp and alone. Eliza tightened her shawl. The land had always protected her, and she had protected it in return. That bond would not break. Not now. Not ever. The cold came harder after Mason left, not colder in temperature. Eliza had known colder years. But colder in feeling, the kind of cold that crept beneath doors that had never let in wind, that hummed through floorboards at night, whispering of things just out of place. It started subtly, a line of boot prints near the woodshed, too large for her own, too fresh to be anything but recent. She stared at them for a long while, her breath fogging in the air, the firewood in her arms forgotten. For a beat, there were only a few prints, as though someone had come and gone quickly. But they went nowhere, just circled the shed and vanished. The next morning, she found the bird feeder pulled down, smashed on the snow. That evening, her woodpile, stacked with aching hands just 3 weeks before, was scattered like a kicked anthill. She stood over it in the blue dusk light, not angry, not even surprised. Just sad. Sad because she'd seen this kind of tactic before. Push gently. Shake the walls. Make the quiet feel like fear. Eliza wasn't naive. She had dealt with editors, critics, readers with entitlement and charm, and people who smiled as they lied. Mason Varelli hadn't smiled when he left the other day because he respected her decision. He had smiled because he didn't believe it would last. The sheriff's office 2 towns over sent a young deputy when she called about the firewood. He arrived with a badge that looked too shiny and eyes that kept drifting to her bookshelf like he was trying to place her. "Probably kids," he said with a shrug. "You know how it is. Cabin out in the woods. Folks get ideas." Eliza had nodded, not bothering to argue. He wasn't here to listen. He was here to file a report and forget it. She watched him drive away, snow flurries caught in his taillights, a part of her already knowing he wouldn't be back. That night, the wind picked up again, banging loose shutters against the siding. Eliza stayed up later than usual, sitting near the fire with a book she didn't read, her cane leaning within reach. She didn't own a gun, never had. Not because she was afraid of them, but because the valley had always made her feel safe without one. But safety was a feeling. And feelings could lie. 3 nights later, the barn burned. She woke to the scent, smoke-edged with pine resin and old ash. By the time she pulled on her coat and boots and hurried, the barn was already lit with dancing flames, orange and wild against the snow, consuming the dry wood with crackling hunger. She didn't cry out or panic. She stood there, breath white in the firelight, heart thudding with a steady, grim rhythm. It wasn't the loss of the barn that hollowed her. It was the intention behind it, the cruelty of setting fire to something so old, so hers. The barn hadn't held animals in years, but it stored her firewood, her extra tools, and the cedar chest with her father's letters from the war. The deputy came again, took pictures, promised to file it properly. When he left, Eliza didn't wave. She walked the perimeter of the blackened ruin, ash crunching beneath her boots, the air still thick with the memory of heat. That's when she heard it, a sound out of place. A breath. Not wind. Not animal panic. Heavy. Calm. Alive. She followed it instinctively around the back, where the light of the fire no longer reached. Her boots cracked ice and soot as she moved closer to the half-collapsed far wall. Something shifted behind the broken crates. She knelt slowly, ignoring the ache in her knees, and peered into the shadows. Amber eyes met hers. Not frantic. Not fearful. Just watching. The bear was enormous. Musk-brown guard along its flank, its breath rising in slow puffs. Eliza didn't move. Neither did the bear. She felt the memory before she recalled it. Last winter, she had found a cub in the ravine, its leg caught in a rusted snare, barely alive, ribs sharp as knives, whimpering with every breath. She'd brought it milk and broth, stayed nearby but never close. When the leg healed enough for it to limp, she left the trap broken in the snow and stopped going near. She assumed it had gone back to the mountains. But it hadn't. It had stayed. And now it had returned. The bear blinked, slow and unafraid. Eliza found herself whispering, "So it's you." The bear exhaled like wind through pine needles. Then it turned, stepping deeper into the shadows, not fleeing, just disappearing into them as if to say, "I'm here if you need me, but not yet." Eliza stood slowly, brushing ash from her coat. She didn't smile, but something inside her steadied. The next day, she cleared the debris in silence. When she found the half-burned cedar chest, she knelt beside it, not daring to open it yet. The scorched edges of her father's handwriting peeked from within. She pressed her hand to the lid and closed her eyes. She didn't call the sheriff again. There would be no more reports. The valley had spoken. She would listen. That night, she wrote again, not in her notebook, but in the lined pages of a letter. Not addressed. Not meant to be sent. Just written, as she had always done when the world felt too big and too cruel. She wrote of trespassers, of smoke, of bears that remembered kindness. Her words weren't angry. They were rooted, like tree roots wrapped tight around old stone. As she wrote, the wind died down. The fire crackled in agreement. And somewhere deep in the trees, something large and living moved without fear. She didn't need to see it to know it was there. She just knew. The valley remembered. And it had chosen its side. The storm rolled in like a held breath finally exhaled. Low skies pressed tight against the earth, wind biting with the hunger of wolves. Snow lashed at the windows in fierce sheets, and the trees outside bent and shuddered, whispering warning through every gust. Eliza McCrae moved through her cabin with practiced ease despite the ache in her joints, loading the wood stove with thick-cut logs and securing every latch and hinge. She could feel it in her bones. Something was coming. And it wasn't just the storm. The air was charged, not like lightning, but like old sorrow stirred from sleep. It had been a week since the fire. Since the bear's eyes met hers in that moment of mutual knowing. And since then, the valley had held its breath. But tonight, something had shifted. She sensed it even before the crunch of tires reached her ears. It was faint at first, hidden behind the wind's howl. But it grew louder. Closer. Wrong. No one drove this trail in a storm. Not unless they were desperate. Or dangerous. She didn't go to the window. She didn't need to. She simply reached for her cane and stood beside the fireplace, waiting. The door shook once, not from the wind. A beat. Then again, this time the unmistakable sound of a shoulder slamming against it. She didn't move. The lock splintered. The door burst inward with a crash that scattered snow across the floor. 3 men stepped into the warm light. Mason Varelli led them. No longer polished. His smile gone. His face twisted with cold calculation. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Last chance, old lady," he said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Sell or regret?" Eliza didn't flinch. Her eyes moved over the 2 men behind him, broad, blank-faced, hired for their size. One carried a crowbar. The other a thick canvas sack, its shape too suggestive to ignore. They were done pretending. Mason stepped farther in, boots dripping on her rug, and sneered. "You're alone, Eliza. This land's going to be ours whether you're here or not." Still, she said nothing. Instead, she turned slowly toward the fireplace and whispered, almost too softly to hear. "Not alone." The silence that followed was thick and expectant. Then it shifted, something in the air, like a gust without wind. A shadow moved behind her, slow, massive, deliberate. The men stiffened. A deep sound rolled through the room, not a growl, not quite, but something older. Something that vibrated through the floorboards and into the marrow of the men's bones. The bear stepped from the far corner where firelight hadn't reached, its body unfolding like thunder, immense and impossibly silent. Snow clung to its fur, melting in dark streaks down its flanks. Its amber eyes glowed with something more than animal instinct. It didn't lunge. It didn't roar. It simply looked at them. And that look undid everything. The man with the crowbar backed up so fast he hit the wall, breath catching in his throat. The one with the sack dropped it, the canvas thudding lifelessly to the floor. Mason didn't move at first, disbelief anchoring his feet. "What the hell is that?" he began, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. The bear stepped forward once. The floor creaked beneath its weight. Its breath steamed in the cabin air, thick and steady, and its gaze never wavered. Mason blinked, sweat beading despite the cold. "That thing's tame," he tried, almost to himself. Eliza turned toward him now, her face calm, her voice steady. "No," she said. "He's not tame. He's a neighbor." The bear growled then, not loud, but low and guttural. A sound that rooted itself in the belly and twisted. Mason broke first. He stumbled back, tripping over the rug, then scrambled out the door into the storm. The other two followed, slipping and cursing as the snow swallowed their boots. The wind slammed the door shut behind them, sealing the cabin once more in silence. The bear exhaled, slow and satisfied, then turned its massive head toward Eliza. She met its eyes and nodded once. "Thank you." The bear lowered itself beside the fireplace with a grunt, as if nothing had happened. As if it had simply returned home to rest. Eliza moved slowly now, her body catching up to what had passed. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her chair, sinking into it beside the fire. The heat flickered across the bear's fur, casting long shadows along the walls. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, there was only breath and wood smoke, and a silence that pulsed like a heartbeat. She sat like that for a long, long time, watching the firelight dance across the bear's massive frame. Her heart steady now. Her resolve stronger than ever. The valley had answered her call. It had not forgotten the kindness she gave. And it had not abandoned her when she needed it most. She thought about this, generations before her. Her father walking these woods with a hunting rifle slung over his back. Her mother harvesting herbs along the creek bed. Her husband building the porch with hands that bore splinters for weeks. And her son, who carved his name into the cedar tree with a pocket knife the year he turned 12. This land remembered all of them. And now it had spoken. In the morning, the storm had buried the trail road again, the tire tracks erased as if the night's trespassers had never come. But Eliza knew they wouldn't return. Not after that. News would travel, of threats made, of lines crossed, of something wild and unexplainable guarding the edge of the civilized world. And Mason Varelli, for all his money and ambition, had met something he couldn't buy off or bulldoze. He had met the mountain's answer. The bear was gone by the time she rose, vanished as quietly as it had come. But she wasn't worried. She knew it would return, just as it always had. As she stepped onto her porch, the wind bit at her cheeks, but the sky above was clear, deep blue and promising sun. A red fox darted along the tree-line, and birds began their tentative song again. Eliza sat in her old rocker, the wood creaking beneath her, and sipped hot tea from the same chipped mug she always used. In her lap, a fresh notebook lay open. Her pen hovered for a moment before she wrote the first line. "Some things can't be taken, they can only be earned." She paused, then smiled faintly. Her hands moved faster after that, filling the page. Behind her, the cabin stood like a heartbeat inside the valley's chest, small, sturdy, and alive. The fire burned on, and in the pines just beyond sight, something massive moved through the snow, slow and watchful. It did not come closer, not yet, but it was there. It always would be. The silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. Cedar Valley exhaled. The snow settled deeper into the hollows between trees. The ice on the creek softened to a quiet trickle beneath its frozen skin, and the cabin stood still, not in fear, but in certainty. The men did not return. Not the next day, not the one after. Mason Varley's black SUV was seen in town once more, but only in motion. its tires spitting gravel as it disappeared down the mountain road, never to come back. Eliza heard whispers drifting on cold air through the post office, from neighbors who seldom came up her way. She scared them off, they said, with a bear, some added, eyes wide, half laughing, half believing. But Eliza didn't correct them. She let the story rise like steam from the earth, something half myth, half memory. Exactly as it should be. A week passed, then two. The forest seemed to breathe easier. The wind lost its edge, and birds returned to the branches with small, bright songs that laced through the trees like thread, mending old wounds. Eliza spent her mornings writing again, not just in journals, but real writing, the kind that had blood beneath it. She found her rhythm with the rustle of pine needles outside and the occasional crunch of snow as deer stepped through their old trails. Sometimes, when she opened the door just after dawn, there would be tracks, big ones, fresh. A single trail that circled the cabin and vanished toward the ravine. And once, left at the edge of the porch like a gift, a single pine cone, chewed and cracked open, placed neatly beside her boots. She picked it up, turned it in her hands, and smiled. The bear had not gone. It had simply resumed its watch. On the third Sunday of the month, the local newspaper sent a young journalist named Tasha Quinn to interview Eliza. She came up the trail road in a battered red Jeep, her coat too thin and her boots soaked by the time she reached the porch. "Sorry," she said, cheeks pink from wind. "I took the wrong turn twice. The GPS doesn't know this place exists." Eliza handed her a towel and a cup of tea. "Most of the world doesn't. And that's the way I like it." Tasha laughed, her notebook already in hand, the page pre-labeled "The Last Woman in Cedar Valley." They sat on the porch bundled in blankets, steam curling from their cups while the trees whispered all around them. Tasha asked the expected questions about Eliza's writing, her retreat from the public eye, the story she never finished. Then came the quieter ones. There was talk, Tasha said, lowering her voice, about trespassers, fires, a bear. Eliza glanced toward the woods, where snow still clung to the lowest branches. "People will say all kinds of things," she said gently. "Sometimes, they even say the truth." Tasha smiled, but her pen slowed. Was it really a bear? Eliza didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and tilted her face toward the pale sky. "He's not mine," she said finally. "He comes and goes as he pleases. But when the time came, he was here. Then he protected you." Eliza nodded, eyes soft. "Sometimes neighbors do that. Even if they have fur and claws." That line made the article. It ran the following Thursday under the headline, "The Bear in the Pines, Cedar Valley's Last Novelist on Memory, Wilderness, and a Visitor with Teeth." It went viral in a quiet sort of way, passed between readers not for its shock but for its reverence. People sent letters again, not about books this time, but about land and legacy and moments when they too had been protected by something unseen. Some offered to donate. Others wanted to visit. A few sent poems. Eliza read them all by the fire, her glasses slipping low on her nose, the letters spread around her like fallen leaves. One afternoon, a state environmental officer arrived at her gate, accompanied by 2 conservation biologists and a local council member. They brought paperwork, polite voices, and coffee in biodegradable cups. "We'd like to propose something," the officer said, standing awkwardly on the snowy porch. "We want to designate Cedar Valley as a protected conservation zone. No development. No clearing. Just preservation, for the ecosystem and for your story." Eliza looked at them, these strangers with good intentions, and felt the old ache of memory press behind her ribs. "It's not my story anymore," she said. "It belongs to the valley." She signed. In the spring, signs went up along the road, Cedar Valley Wildlife and Heritage Preserve. The map changed. The developers withdrew. Officially, they cited cost, logistics, poor terrain. But unofficially, the whispers continued about the woman who said no. About the bear who stood behind her. Summer came late, as it always did. The snow retreated up the slopes, and the air filled with birdsong and the smell of damp pine and thawed earth. Eliza planted wildflowers by the steps, her knees protesting but her spirit light. The cabin breathed easier with the windows open, and squirrels returned to the eaves. Children from the nearby town began to hike the edge of the preserve with their parents, pointing at nests and paw prints, their voices high and excited. One afternoon, a boy no older than 8 paused at the gate. Eliza was trimming the herbs near her porch. He looked at her with the full weight of childhood curiosity. "Is it true?" he asked. "About the bear?" She dusted her hands and smiled. "Depends which part you mean." "That he saved you?" "Ah," she said, her eyes twinkling. "No, not just me. He saved this." She gestured to the trees, to the sky, to the land beneath her feet. "The whole valley?" The boy looked wide-eyed. "Wigwang." Eliza crouched beside him, her voice soft. "Because a long time ago, someone was kind to him. And kindness," she said, placing a hand over his heart, "never forgets." That night, she sat on the porch beneath the first stars, the fire inside flickering, the air full of crickets and pine-scented hush. A shape moved at the edge of the trees, slow, solid, familiar. The bear stepped into the clearing without fear, its coat darker now beneath the summer sky, its eyes reflecting firelight like gold. Eliza didn't move. She didn't need to. The bear stopped a few feet away and lowered itself to the ground with a sigh so human it caught in her chest. They sat like that, 2 creatures shaped by time and loss and a love for the wild. The bear rested its head on its paws. Eliza leaned back in her chair. For a long while, neither of them spoke. And nothing needed saying. Some stories don't end with battles or victories, or even words. Some end with peace. And sometimes, the truest form of peace is simply knowing that when you are no longer able to stand guard, something else will. The mountain remembers. The forest keeps watch. And somewhere, always just out of sight, a neighbor with fur and claws is listening.